Welcome to the Layer 7 April office hours. Today we have with us Greg Thompson, and he's going to be presenting on the API governance with the Layer 7 API portal. Just a quick, housekeeping note. I am going to make sure that all of you are unmuted so that you're able to come off mute during, and we have an interactive session. So during the presentation, you can ask questions so that it's more interactive. Also, I did want to mention quickly, for those of you who may not be aware, we are having a API Days in New York. Is right around the corner. It's May 13th and 14th in New York. And I will be putting the registration link in the chat as Greg is doing his presentation. And we do have free passes. So if you're in that area or know of customers or other people in that area, please share it with them and register. And we would love to see you at the conference in a few weeks. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Greg. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Pam. So my name is Greg Thompson. I'm a product manager within the Layer 7 API security team, and we're going to talk about how to leverage the Layer 7 API portal for API governance. So what we're going to cover today is, what is governance and why it matters, how to leverage the concept of policy templates and policy template categories to operationalize some governance capabilities. And then ultimately, how do you build, publish, and govern, version, all those good things around policy templates to make this all happen. So first off, what is governance? I mean, essentially governance is the rules, policies, et cetera, around how APIs should be published and used. The main goal here is to make sure that when APIs get published, they have proper security, proper access controls, any kind of standards that may be in place, such as logging, auditing that may be required to be captured, enforcement of any kind of usage limits, things of quotas, rate limits, things like that. So it's really, answers the question of, who can publish the APIs, what must be true of every API that is published, and how are they all managed. Why does this matter? First off, risk, right? Ungoverned APIs are a major attack vector, a major risk from a security point of view. Operational costs, right? Essentially, in the traditional way of creating APIs in Layer 7, right, you'd go into Policy Manager, you'd create a policy, you'd publish it, and then you'd deploy that out to perhaps other gateway clusters that may be out there. And so each policy kind of became a snowflake in a sense, right? You could definitely have some reusable aspects of that are shared, but it always required somebody to go touch Policy Manager and create something, which also meant you had to be an expert on Layer 7 policy language as well. Part of this is also related to the velocity cost, right? Typically the process I'm describing is done by a central team, so you have a small group of experts who know all about Layer 7, all about Layer 7 Policy Manager, and could write these policies. But to really unlock the value and unlock the speed here, you really need to get away from that central model and be able to support a true self-service experience. So this is what we're going to talk about today, is how you really can unlock that. I think compliance is a big key, right? Part of making sure that there is a provable, repeatable pattern that is enforced as APIs get published. So here really it's governance. Governance has can sometimes have a negative connotation to it, but it's not really about bureaucracy, right? If we do it right and we do it well, the whole thing makes everything speed up and helps unlock the value and the ability to go faster with getting APIs out there. So how do we take this to implementation using Layer 7? We're going to talk about kind of four main concepts here. One is policy templates, right? These are the kind of reusable, pre-approved building blocks that you'll use to kind of build up an API policy. We'll talk about policy template categories, right? These are the things that take in turn provide the enforcement, right? So every API must use a template provided in the authentication category, for example. Then we'll talk about self-service publishing, right? This is really what, once these templates and categories are in place, this is really what unlocks that self-service publishing capability. And then we'll talk about how the portal is used as a central control plane, right? So once these templates are uploaded and managed by the portal, you can actually push these to all the gateways across multiple environments, multiple clusters, and give you that central point of managing these. So as I mentioned before, policy templates basically are the building blocks, right? It's a reusable component. It's applied when you publish the API. And then the policy behind that template is what's enforced at runtime by the API gateway. There's generally two categories of templates. One is the system/standard templates. These are templates that get automatically installed when you enroll a gateway with the API portal. You cannot really uninstall them or delete them, but leveraging this idea of policy template categories, you can hide them so that they are not visible to API publishers unless you want them to be. And then the other category is custom, right? And that's really, to really put the governance in place here, this is really about, being able to tailor these templates and categories to match your governance needs. So that, again, that's the focus of what we're talking about today, and we'll dig into more as to how to set that up and how to create these custom templates. One thing I'll call out, is a critical caveat here. Right? Standard templates. So as you look into the policy or the API portal when you first enroll a gateway, you'll see kind of like standard API or standard policy template API key or standard policy template OAuth 2.0. One thing to note, those are monolithic templates, so they do everything, right? They do the API key enforcement, the authentication, and ultimately do the actual routing to the backend service. So just want to call out, if you go, excuse me, if you go down this path of leveraging templates and putting the governance in place, you're going to see that we recommend that the templates be more purpose-driven, right? They provide a kind of discrete set of capabilities. And so while these standard templates provide some great examples, they're not really recommended to be used if you're trying to get into this model that we're going to be talking about today. So again, they're great if you want to see how is routing done and how are things set up around routing. It's great to look at those and see how it's done and maybe extract part of that into your template. But they're not really meant to be used in conjunction with custom templates. So just want to make sure that's crystal clear, and make sure that as we go through this, you don't think of standard templates as something you just combine with other templates. The other thing I'll highlight here, this idea of publishing models. For those that are familiar with the API portal, you'll often see the term gateway published or portal published. For gateway published templates, right, those are ones that are created on the gateway, they live on the gateway. You must manually replicate those to other gateways, whether that's using Grafman or GMU or some other process. But you have to make sure those templates, once created on one gateway, are actually manually deployed on all the other gateways or gateway clusters that are in your environment. And if you fail to do that, that can cause some strange behaviors like the inability to deploy an API because of a missing template, and just some other kind of transient behaviors that may not be ideal. Portal published, that's the recommended approach going forward, leveraging the API developer portal. Essentially, you create those templates and then you upload them to the portal, and then you centrally manage them from the portal itself. And the portal will be able to push those templates to the gateways on demand. So that's really the way to make sure that you have visibility across all those gateway environments, and that you can ensure that all the templates are where they need to be, right there from one place. So again, this really makes the portal the source of truth, makes it easier to kind of see and understand what's out there. And so we really want to say, prefer the portal published approach, unless you have some very specific reason why, gateway published is the way you want to do things. I do know historically, right, a lot of folks started with gateway and kind of started with gateway only, and so this idea of using portal and portal published is perhaps a bit new, and we'll maybe take some time to kind of transition to. But I definitely, encourage you to look at this approach as you go forward and make sure that you're considering, this portal published approach, because it's going to ultimately make life easier and really unlock this self-service experience. All right. So the end-to-end workflow for working with these policy templates and setting this up is, first you're going to build a policy in Policy Manager. So that part kind of remains true, right? You're going to still use Policy Manager. You're going to still create a policy, and then ultimately that policy will get turned into an encapsulated assertion, and then you'll be able to export that as a GraphMan bundle. So at that point, you're kind of done with Policy Manager. You can then upload that portal or upload that template to the portal and deploy it to all the gateways, and then assign it to a policy template category, and then ultimately, that drives the assignment to an API. But once you've done that part, right, the interaction with Policy Manager is essentially complete. You really only use the Policy Manager to build those initial templates, and if you need to modify templates and create new versions. So again, your central team that are the Layer 7 experts would do this part, but the actual publishing of APIs, once this is all in place, it can really be done by anyone without any knowledge whatsoever of Layer 7 policy. So I will be doing a demo here very shortly. A few concepts I just kind of wanted to call out before we go into the demo, kind of for you to maybe look for, pay special attention to, because they are important, and we will come back to these as well. But there's a concept of, when an API publisher sees these templates, they're going to see things like drop-down values in the UI. There's a special syntax in Policy Manager using this L7.enum prefix. So definitely look out for that. There's also the idea of these policy templates may contain things that should be considered sensitive. It could be usernames, passwords, whatever. Ultimately, these fields get encrypted. They are never displayed in the portal. So once you type them in, they're masked. And when you go to retrieve the value of those templates later, all you get is the masked value. And then they are stored securely on the gateway itself. So there's a prefix for that, L7.secure, when you create these variables within these policies, and we'll look at that a little bit more here as we go through. Another concept of making fields in a template mandatory, right? So fields can be optional or mandatory. If you want to make them mandatory, you simply add an asterisk at the end of the label, and we'll show that as well. Bundles, which are bundles are basically the representation of the template. They do have versions, and there is this version notation x.y.z for major.minor.patch. So again, we'll talk a little bit more about that and how that works, but something to look out for. And then lastly, templates only appear to publishers if they're assigned to a policy template category. So once a policy template bundle is uploaded to the portal, by default, it will not be visible to anyone until you actually go in and set that up in a category. So we'll show a bit about that as well. So we're about to get to the demo here. So one thing I want to say for the demo, I'm going to start with the end, right? So I want to show you first what a template experience looks like to a API publisher. So when they go to create a new API, what their experience is and what they see. We'll step back from there and rewind a little bit and look at the actual idea of policy template categories and how those are actually managed. And then we'll dig deeper and go back and look at how you use Policy Manager to actually create these templates and set up some of the things I mentioned, such as your drop-down values and mandatory fields and such. But then finally at the very end, we'll go back and apply a patch. So we'll take a policy template and make a change to it and create a kind of a minor patch version of that. So with that, we'll jump into the demo. I will pause though. Are there any questions on anything so far before we get to the demo? Okay, if not, All right, so this is a Layer 7 API developer portal that has been branded with a fake company called Pepperco Shipping and Freight. I'm going to go ahead and log into that. Okay, so once logged in, I'm going to go through the experience of publishing an API. So to do that, I'm going to go to Manage APIs. I'm going to click Add API, and we're just going to quickly create a kind of a shell of an API here for demo purposes. So let's get a name. I'm just filling in some kind of fake values here just for the purpose of getting to the experience. Okay, we're going to skip the custom field. And next thing here is policy templates. So this is the area that we're focused on today, is this idea of policy templates. So as I'm an API publisher, when I'm here filling out the information to actually publish my API, I'm going to get to this section which basically controls what policy is going to be enforced on my API. So you'll see here, for example, authentication. There's this red square here that basically is 1+. This indicates that I am not allowed to publish this API until I resolve this condition of at least using one template from the authentication category. And to do that, I'm just going to click on Add Templates, and maybe I'll pick, API key header validation. So this is a template that's basically doing very minimal authentication. It probably wouldn't even call it authentication. It's more of just an API key validation. But in any case, I am required to at least use something from that category. API foundations is another category that I must use. In this case, it's saying that all the templates in this category are required. And so for this one, I can actually just click the compliant button, and that will automatically add all of those policy templates to my API. And then finally, I'm required to route this someplace, right? So I need to use at least one form of routing. And again, I'll go to Add Templates. In this case, I only have one template available at this moment, so I will pick on that one. We'll also note that this route request has some fields that must be filled in. And so this one has an example of a location of API. Typically, you would actually just pull in the location of the API from the previous screen. But if I wanted to override that for some special reason, I could do that here. Just put something like that, right? So once I've satisfied all those conditions, you'll notice everything is green, and I do have this save button enabled. So I'm able to actually go ahead and publish this API. You also notice I have other options up here. So anything that's optional will also be displayed. So for example, I have this miscellaneous category, and I could add a template here that talks about drop-down example, right? So, and this one, if you'll see kind of, this category has a handlebar, so I can actually pull it up and place it anywhere I want to place it in this policy. The policy, just like in Policy Manager, does execute from top to bottom. So all this will happen in the order that it is defined here. And for the drop down, right, for example, this gives me the idea of I can actually provide a value, right, A or B in this case. And if I wanted to add another category, I can click on that. Maybe I've got advanced API security. That one I'm not able to relocate, but it is optional. So in this case, I could pick something like this one, and again, see its information. So this is the experience, right? So the API publisher does not need to know anything about Layer 7 policy language per se, right? They can kind of see it's very cleanly set up in the categories, capabilities. They need to know that it happens in a sequential order. But beyond that, they don't need to know the concept of necessarily Layer 7 policy assertions or any of that. So I'll pause there. Are there any questions on this so far? If not, so next thing I'll kind of back up a little bit and talk about how this experience of seeing the categories and the templates in this UI are managed. So I'm just going to cancel this. So to see that, I'm going to go up to manage, and I'm going to manage policy template categories. This is the current configuration of the categories set up here within this portal. The order that you define them in this list page is the order that they are presented. Each of these categories has a set of properties associated with it. So for example, these here that are declared as fixed mean that they cannot be reordered. They must be used once and in the exact order they're defined here. This idea of flexible just means that this category can be used pretty much anywhere within the policy. If I take a look, for example, at the authentication, you can give a description so that the API publisher can understand more about what this category does. I can control the templates that are assigned to this category to the templates tab. So if I wanted to add a new policy template option for authentication, I can just click add templates. I could find the template that I want to look for, and let's see, I could look for something like, I'll just type in backend, right? So I can filter this list and look for things like backend. But every template that is known by the portal will be available for display here, and I can just basically click include and save. I mean, once I've done that, this new template here, backend auth, is assigned to this category. Again, the fixed versus flexible just controls whether or not the order of these templates is enforced. I'm just going to remove this one for a moment. Then management tab is where you really control some of the behaviors, right? So is this API applicable to any API, or you have SOAP or REST, private versus public access, defines whether this category would be visible to those types of APIs. The category position, so this is the fixed versus flexible I was showing earlier. The template usage requirements basically indicates, again, this checkbox indicates, are you required to use this category? And then your options are you requiring just one of the templates to be used from the category or all of the templates? Then there's an option here to allow whether or not fixed templates can be reordered within the category. So you can choose whether or not to allow that. And then there's this last option to indicate whether or not you want to enforce these category rules for existing APIs. So one thing that happens is when you set these rules up, you may have noticed when I first went over to the APIs list page, there was a lot of red non-compliant APIs identified there, right? So as you change these rules, APIs will be flagged as non-compliant with these rules. If those changes, make them non-compliant. But you have the option of whether or not you want to block the publishing of APIs that already exist. So if a non-compliant API becomes non-compliant because you changed the rules, if someone needs to update that API that's already rolled out and published, this basically indicates whether or not you want to force that API to become immediately compliant, or if you want to give them a grace period to perhaps still be able to make some changes and then become compliant later. Then there's the option of basically understanding which APIs are currently using this category. So if you do want to make changes to this category, you can kind of get a view of how that will impact all the APIs that are currently published. And again, the compliance that I was just mentioning is also highlighted here. So again, you can see if if APIs are compliant or not based on the current settings of this specific category. And then finally, I think if on the management tab, there's a setting, which I don't have it handy here, but there is ability to associate a category to specific organizations. So if you want to essentially create a special rule for a specific organization, so that those API publishers might have slightly different rules than everyone else, you can create a category that's bound to only specific organizations as well. Yeah, any questions on that? Okay, if not, as promised, the next step I'm going to take here is to actually go and create a new policy template in Policy Manager. I think I'm still live here with this. Yep. Okay, so I have an example policy that's currently up, but let's go ahead and create a new one from scratch. So I'm going to go to tasks. Well, actually, I'm going to do it from here. I'm going to go to the, I'm going to put it in this policy templates folder that I have. So I'm actually going to go here and create a policy. I'm going to just call this office hours demo-1.0. It's an included policy fragment. All right, so I have this. For the sake of speed, I'm just going to copy and paste this current policy. And essentially, so this policy I'm setting up here is going to be one that does routing. So there's this set context variable at line number 3 here called override template routing. There's a requirement that you must set that to true to do routing within a template. Otherwise, there is a part of the policy that gets created by the portal when the API gets created that will do the routing already. So unless you have special requirements for how routing is done, you don't have to override it. You can actually let the policy do it, whatever it needs to do, and then it will by default get to routing at the very end. But if you have special requirements, such as maybe you need to better control headers, things like that, that are being sent to the back end, you can create a routing template. You just need to declare that this template is doing routing, so it's going to override the template routing. And then there's examples here of pulling out the URI from the incoming request. If I click on this section, right, this is the actual route request. You'll see that there are certain variables that are already kind of predefined by the portal in this case. So the API location, for example, will be automatically pulled from the field where you were filling in the location when you were publishing the API in the portal. So that'll get automatically set. For things like analytics, if you want analytics to show up in the portal, your templates do need to set these portal.analytics values. So for example, the response code would be the status as coming back from the backend service. So if everything was successful, it might be set to 200 in this case. If something failed, so the route itself failed, there might be an error code returned from the backend. You would also need to set that. And then very importantly, you'll need to export any context variables out of this fragment so that they're available to other templates and in the core logic of the kind of the parent policy at the very end. So here you'll just kind of declare that you want to make sure the template routing and the response codes are available outside of this. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and save and activate this. So the next step basically in taking this policy and turning it into a template is to make it an encapsulated assertion. So to do that, I'm just going to right click and say create encapsulated assertion. It's going to ask me if I want to auto populate. I can say yes. I'll just give it a name. So this is office hours demo-1.0. I'm going to put this in the custom assertions folder. This just indicates on a palette over here on the left where this encapsulated assertion would show up when you're looking at it in Policy Manager. Let's say example given in office hours of a template that does routing. These are input variables. If I want to make those available onto the UI we were looking at earlier, right, where the API publisher was looking at all the categories and the templates. If I want to do that, I basically just would be to go and say edit and show it and give it a label. In this case, I don't want to show those because these are just variables internally being used. These are not ones I actually want to expose to the API publisher. So in this case, I'm really done. I just want to basically give a simple routing policy, so I can just click OK. And now I have the encapsulated assertion that will be able to be turned into a policy template. So to get this policy template into the portal, basically I want to export it as a Graphman bundle. There's two ways to do that. One is using the Graphman client, and one is to use the new web-based policy manager. So I'm going to actually jump over to the web-based policy manager for this part. The reason I did not show the web-based policy manager for the creation is because the web-based policy manager does not yet support the ability to create encapsulated assertions. So if you're just wondering, that will be coming soon, however. So to export this, I want to say export a Graphman bundle. By default, the export shows everything in the gateway, so it does take just a few seconds here for it to present all that information to me, but I'm going to, yeah, it'll take just a second here. Okay, so I want to unselect everything. I'm going to go to encapsulated assertions, and then I have the one I created below called office hours demo. So I'm just going to select that one. On the right-hand side, it lets me know that I have selected one. I actually want to add the dependencies here, so I'm going to click on the Add the Dependencies button. And I want to check the format as XML. I'm paused because I am not sure why this turned into 3. That should have been 2. So one of the rules for creating these policy templates is you want to make sure that you're not using anything that would be like a policy fragment directly inside of a template. You really want to keep these templates as self-contained. That eliminates any need to have dependencies as you move these around. So if you can kind of keep them completely self-contained with no other, included fragments and such, that makes it very clean and very easy to manage and version these. So yeah, I'm not sure why I'm seeing 3 here, but we'll take a look at that. And then essentially, I want to use the export format of XML. That's what the portal is expecting. And then I'm going to go ahead and export. This ends up giving me a file called bundle.json. The fact that I had the number 3 in dependencies makes me question whether this is going to cause me a problem, but we'll see. So one thing I need to do is bundle.json. I need to rename it. So I'm just going to move bundle.json to be called office hours demo-1.0, then .0.json. So the format I mentioned versioning earlier, this x.y.z format, that's important. That is enforced and required by the portal. So I'm just going to rename that. And after I do that, I have my JSON bundle here, this office hours demo 1.0.0. At this point, I should be able to take this to the portal. Again, I'm not going to be surprised if there is a problem, given that I had the 3 dependencies there, because typically, that screen where you saw 3, I should only see 2, it being the encapsulated assertion and the backing policy fragment. So that should be the only 2 items in this. So this might or might not work. We'll see. But I'm going to go to Manage. I'm going to go to Gateway Bundles, right? And then I'm going to click Add Bundle to add this to the portal. At this point, it'll just let me navigate to the file. Go to Office Hours Demo 1.0.0, and I'll click Save. Yep, and as expected, there was something about that bundle that I have something not quite right with that. I call it Murphy's Law. So given that, let me see if I can export. I'll just create another really simple one. I'm not sure what I did wrong with that one, but bear with me for just a moment. Let's do it. Okay, let's see. We'll call this 2.0. I'm just going to leave it empty for the moment, just for the sake of rushing through this. All right, creating encapsulated assertion. All right, so let me go back over here. Yep, again, this is just the law of demos, right? Anytime you try to do a live demo, something unexpected is going to happen. All right, so let's try to scan encapsulated assertions, office hours, demo 2.0, add dependencies. Now I get 2 as I expect in XML. Yeah, so interestingly enough, I'm not sure what I did to pick up an initial dependency, but that is obviously what broke this. So let's move the bundle.json to office hours demo, and I name this one 2.0. And if I go back to the portal, let's clear. Let's pick up the new bundle, which hopefully should work in this case. Yeah. Okay, so in this case, now I have the new bundle added. It lets me know that the version of that bundle is 2.0.0. I can go to the bundle deployments tab here, and I can actually deploy this bundle now to the various gateways I have in my environment. So I can deploy to my prod environment. That shows it's deployed as version 2.0.0. Then I can deploy it to the QA environment. Check that. Also shows that it's 2.0.0. So from here, I can see where all this bundle is actually deployed and which version of it is deployed. And then if I wanted to add this to a category, just as I showed before, I would just go to Manage, Policy Template Categories. From there, I can actually add the bundle. But let's say I made a change to this and I want to create a new version. As I mentioned, earlier, the patch level of this bundle will indicate whether or not I can just update this bundle in place or whether I would be creating a new bundle. So in this case, I have version 2.0.0. Let's say I want to make a version 2.0.1. And again, for simplicity, I'm just going to update the file name itself. I'm going to say it's 2.0.1 in this case. So the way I do this is I just go back to Manage Bundles, and I'm going to click Add Bundle again, and I'm going to pick that new version. So in this case, I've got 2.0.1. Once I hit Save, the portal recognizes that it is a patch to an existing bundle version. So now this becomes version 2.0.1. If I look at my gateway bundle deployments, the one thing you'll notice, we do not automatically deploy this new bundle. So you do need to come here and see the versions of gateways that are out there and decide when you're ready to actually update the bundle on the gateway. And to do that, I would just literally click Update. That will then redeploy this bundle to that API or to the gateway. And the same here. So now I can see that I have version 2.0.1. It is deployed to all the gateways. And any APIs that were currently using the version 2.0 of the office hours demo bundle would automatically get updated. So the only time you would need to go in and change the APIs themselves if you were to modify the major or minor version of that bundle. So if I had office hours demo version 2.1, for example, or 3.0, those would actually show up in the portal as new and different templates. And then wherever I want to apply those, I would need to physically go to the API and update the API's policy in that policy template editor section to make that applicable. And that's just done so that you don't break any existing APIs, right? The assumption is a patch is a minor change that is non-breaking. Version updates are assumed to be breaking. Either there's a change in the interface where maybe some additional parameters may be required, or a fundamental change in behavior. And so you just want to make sure those are very controlled in terms of getting updated and do not accidentally break anything. Okay, so that's it for the demo section. Is there any questions before I move on? Okay, if not, continuing on. So I covered on some of these, right? So making sure how your templates are built correctly. Right? You're always going to start in Policy Manager. So I mentioned you need to make sure that the policy build is self-contained. Do not include any other fragments. That issue I ran into where I went to export the encapsulated assertion and dependencies, and that number was 2 is what you're supposed to see. The case where I had 3 means that I did something incorrectly there. And so that basically caused an error when I went to import that. So it does need to be a self-contained fragment or self-contained bundle. That way you don't run into any kind of dependency issues as you try to deploy these to other gateways. Right? It must be an encapsulated assertion. Mandatory fields, must use a trailing asterisk to indicate that they're mandatory. You need to make sure you export any variables from the fragment in that template as you create it to ensure that anything that template may set is available for use in the rest of the policy. And then if you want analytics to work, you need to make sure that there are these portal analytics variables that are set. And I'll point you to where you can find a listing of those. Versioning, as I talked about, right, we use the x.y.z format. In your policy name itself, the recommendation is to use the major minor, the x.y, in the actual name. So for example, when I created my template, it was my template-1.0. That's the actual policy name, the actual encapsulated assertion name. And when you look at it within the policy manager on the gateway, you'll clearly see that that is that 1.0 version. For the bundle file itself, we use the full x.y.z format. So my template 1.0 becomes my template 1.0.0. We kind of abstract away that Z patch level between the portal and the gateway just to ensure that you do not run into any issues with deploying different versions of that to the actual gateway. If I were to rename that template on the gateway itself to like 1.0.1, that would actually be a breaking change. So that's why the Z value is not carried forward into the actual name of the template. And as I mentioned, right, the Z, if you're only updating the Z value, it's in place. Once you deploy that to the gateways, it's automatically applied to any APIs that are using it. Major minor versions are treated as a new template. So those will show up brand new, distinct templates that you'll need to go in and update your APIs directly to how those take effect. A couple things to remember, right? We talked about governance, right? The policy template categories and the use of templates is really how the portal enforces all this governance, right? Making sure APIs are published with proper security, proper standards that you need to have in place. The idea here is really you're unlocking the trust to allow others to self-publish their APIs while ensuring that they can't be bypassing, rules and standards that are in place. Things that, order matters. I talked about this, right, as you're creating these templates, the order in which you define categories and templates are the order in which they are executed. So you want to put careful thought into those as you're setting this up. For example, you probably want to do threat protection before you do authentication. Usage rules, right, the all versus any. So for example, if you're creating an authentication category, you probably only want to do authentication once, but you may want to give some options as to what types of authentication you allow them to support. It could be basic, OAuth, it could be leveraging mutual TLS, etc. Fixed versus flexible positions, where it allows you to define whether the order of things are completely locked in, whereas flexible will give some leeway to allow things to be moved around. So for example, if you have a template that's doing some sort of logging, you might let them put that in different places, maybe actually even use it multiple times, depending on what the logging behavior is. And so that's a case where you might have something that's flexible versus fixed, which is a fixed, rigid order. As you create the categories, remember you can actually associate them so that they're applied only to different types of APIs, whether they're REST or SOAP, public or private. And then you can also establish per organization rules as well. So if you want to create a category that's special purpose for a specific organization or a specific set of organizations, you can create that category and then target those specific organizations by assigning them to that category. Some best practices as you're going through this, right? Remember, again, we want to prefer the use of portal published templates to give you more control. Remember, as I talked about the standard templates, right? The standard, API key policy or the standard OAuth 2 policies. don't combine those with the cases where you're doing custom routing, right? Those templates really are meant to be kind of used by themselves if you use them. So if you want to go, the recommendation is to go more modular, right? Create a template that does one specialized job. And so in that case, you don't want to combine those with the standard templates. There's the use of the L7.secure, L7.enum for handling secure fields versus kind of drop-down values. The use of asterisk for mandatory fields. The versioning, remember, breaking changes or you're updating the X and Y values of the version. In-place upgrades for a patch or the Z value. If your template is not visible, remember when you upload a template, you need to assign it to a category. And if you're creating a routing policy, make sure you're setting the override template routing to true and that it's exported from that policy. Next slide here is really covering an example of what a good configuration of policy template categories might look like. Obviously, this may vary based on your needs. But an example is, maybe you want to set a category that does threat protection up front that's required, that maybe has some general corporate-wide minimum best practice in place for doing threat protection. You may want to give some authentication options, but require that they pick one of those. Rate and quota, there's actually a system level rate and quota template. This is something that you do want to use because anywhere you're configuring rate and quote limits in the portal, that template that we provide as a system level template is the one that does that enforcement. So you can actually use that one directly in conjunction with all the others. And you want to probably make sure it's required and added to the APIs. Otherwise, the rates and quotas will not get enforced. Message validation, you may want to give them some options. Maybe it's the open API versus a JSON or XML schema. Routing, again, you might have different backend routing needs in terms of what backend system the API requests are ultimately getting routed to. So again, you want to make them pick one, but you want to maybe give a couple of options based on how that backend system works. Maybe you want to do something with responses. So after the route to the backend system happens, maybe you want to do something like capture some metrics. And then maybe you want to provide an optional flexible category for logging that you can perhaps use at the end, or maybe even at other points within the overall policy. So in summary, API governance, right? I think it's a very critical aspect of really unlocking the self-service experience, right? To make sure security is in place, the overall ability to trust that those that are publishing APIs are doing it based on the standards that have been put in place. Again, the portal template, policy templates and categories are really how the portal leverages this and operationalizes this governance. And then again, a reminder of some of the conventions that we talked about. So all these conventions I mentioned are on the L7 enum, secure, analytics variables, all that is available now out on GitHub. So there's a document, if you navigate to this Layer 7 community repo, there is a sample policies folder, and within that there is a portal templates folder. And that is a place where we have provided some pretty extensive documentation on how to do all the things that I just covered, as well as some actual sample templates that are out there also. And I'll just bring that up real quick so you can see that, but this is the area that I'm talking about. So there is a couple of some documentation here, and then there is this Layer 7 policy templates guide, which is pretty extensive, covers a lot of what I covered today, and then a lot more as well. So this provides the full steps of how to create those templates, how to export them either with Grafman or through the web-based policy manager, various input options available, dealing with custom routing, drop-down fields, secure fields, etc. So refer back to that as your kind of your overall guide as to how to work with these templates and set this up. All right, with that, I believe we are at the end. So are there, I thank you for your attention, and yeah, are there any questions on any of this?
And as a reminder, you can take yourselves off mute and ask questions directly, or you can type them in the panel, either one. And right now, Greg, I'm not seeing questions come in the panel itself.
Hello.
Yes.
I have a few comments or questions, let's say, some sort of things that I noted down during the presentation. As far as I know, when we create APIs using the templates in the dev portal, they go into the portal APIs folder.
Yes.
I wonder if there is a flexibility for this. For example, if we are working in a banking domain, then it would be good to have some APIs in the account, some APIs in the some business domains, for example, or this can be managed manually after the creation, like moving the APIs manually from the portal APIs to the correct folders, which is
Yeah.
also important for the governance from my point of view.
Yeah. By default, you say they all go into this portal APIs folder. There is a customization policy, and let's see if I can find it. Portal integration customizations here for APIs. So this policy here is a way that you can change that behavior. So what'll happen is when an API gets sent to the gateway, this policy will be applied, and you can come in here and actually override where the API is actually getting stored. So you could put it in your own custom folder. Maybe you could look at a certain value or something within that payload and determine which folder it should go into. And I think this policy, the storage service is where you could do that as well in the extension. So short answer is yes, you can customize that, but it does require you to kind of come into the policy and create that customization today. We could certainly look at providing more flexibility from the UI itself at some point, but this is how you would achieve that today.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, another question I also have, like this is good for creating the APIs without that people involve in the policy manager. Then they can easily create the APIs. But the question about the synchronization of the APIs, if there is a requirement after the creation, a modification requirement on the API, then at the end it might be something like an out of synchronization, like that we have created the API using the portal, but at the end someone did some adjustments or modifications on the API, and this is something hidden that we should go into the policy manager and check with the API version, then we can understand. Or if there is a possibility to see the synchronization is broken, on the dev portal, this also could be a good feature. This is a comment, not a question.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, so yeah, generally you probably don't want people trying to do it both ways, at least not on the same API, right? So it is possible that yeah, once the API gets pushed down to the gateway, someone with permission logs in a policy manager and updates it. The thing with that is, though, if they do that, at some point the API will get overwritten. If you make any change to it on the gateway, I mean on the portal side, it will ultimately be overridden. And you could also, if I look at, I'm just going to just logging in and looking at one of these here, but like deployments, for example, right? This lets me know if that API is actually deployed. So each API, if I go to the deployments tab, so this should highlight if there is some sort of issue where it's not deployed. But yeah, there's not like an audit that will detect that somebody modified it on the gateway. So I guess that's kind of what you're asking for, is kind of the detection that somebody's tampered with it. Is that kind of ultimately what you're saying? Okay, I'm not sure if you're on mute, but
Sorry, couldn't get you.
I would say
Exactly.
you're kind of looking for like maybe an indication here that someone changed
Yeah,
it on the gateway without coming to the
yeah, it
portal.
could be. Yeah, it could be. Then because the next override attempt can overwrite the changes done manually, for example, and
It
this
will.
can be something important. But here, if we have a sign about this, then there is something overwritten in the policy manager. Then this can give a good sign, and then this can prevent some errors also.
Yep. Okay. Yep. I understand. All right. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you too. One more question I have. This is the last one. You use the bundle export method of the template creation for the developer portal. As I remember, there is also another approach using the portal publishable something like an encapsulated assertion. And when we place the encapsulated assertion in that assertion in the encapsulated assertion we created, then it was something like the portal was recognizing these templates automatically. But my question is related to you. For example, you did publish on multiple gateways, like at the end, the template end up in different, in multiple MySQL databases. In the approach, we use the portal publishable encapsulated assertion. If it's still a valid method, then how can we synchronize the gateways?
Yeah, so I think the approach you're describing is what we call gateway published templates. So yeah, I didn't really cover that because that's really not the preferred way of doing it. It is still valid, right? So the idea is you create that encapsulated assertion on the gateway. You have to include that portal publishable or set as portal publishable fragment assertion in that. And then once you've done that, that template will show up in the portal, but you do need to manually place it on every gateway that you want to have that used. So it is that's that manual process I mentioned of you have to create it and then migrate it to where you want it to go out of band from the portal itself. So you can't mix and match. Like if you want the portal to control the deployment, you need to do it the way I described. If you want to control it all via scripting or whatever on the back end, then you can do what you described with that approach and just kind of do that migration out of band.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. All right, any other questions? We have 1 minute remaining. Okay, if not, yep, thank you everyone. I appreciate your time and I hope you found this useful.
Yep. Thanks everyone for joining today.